Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
To say that the secular authorities hates homeschooling and hates private schooling, and especially Catholic schools, is an understatement. The ethos, the philosophy of education in the United States and in the West has been that education is not for instilling virtue. It's not for making people think critically and to help them understand their duties and all the rest of the things that education in Christendom was understood to be used for. They believe education is to make better citizens. And it's why you see education focus on essentially two things: the most basic reasoning skills needed to go do a drudgerous job that people burn out in. And the other, of course, is to not question the order of things. The sort of propaganda people are instilled with in the system is the hallmark of modern education. You see this with all the education-related debates involving people like Matt Walsh and other kinds of things like that. And the bishops in America have traditionally offered an alternative: Catholic schools, which provide some basis of a classical education rooted in the great writings of the church and the pre-Christian pagans who were clearly pointing the way towards Christianity, like Aristotle and figures like that, as well as, of course, the great writings of Western civilization, much of which is now being wiped out in the secular sphere. And the other alternative to that has been homeschooling, and the Catholic bishops have actually been defenders of homeschooling. In fact, if you read what the Vatican has said historically on the issue of sending your kids to public school, they've likened it to a sin to send them to a public school in places where the church is essentially attacked on a daily basis by the authorities or by the culture. Yeah, a mortal sin. They've actually likened it to that. I know that's a hard thing for many to hear because they don't have many other choices in the matter. It's not the subject of this. Here's what happened recently in the news. In the state of Illinois, the secular authorities had decided to crack down on homeschooling and private schools. They did so by implementing some draconian measures meant to make sure homeschoolers and the secular alternatives to homeschooling, like private schools and religious private schools, were on the same page as the secular authorities' schools of choice, with all the indoctrination that goes with that. And they threatened essentially to make it so you can't do those things in that state. So we got a Catholic vote with this headline: Illinois bishops drop opposition to controversial homeschool bill. Yeah, they had been the vanguard of fighting against this bill in Illinois, one that has got all homeschoolers there and private schools really worried that the state is going to crack down on them. And the Illinois bishops, the head of whom is Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago, had been vocally opposing this. Now, suddenly, they're not. They've apparently said they are now satisfied by the bill, even though no one can really say how, because it doesn't look like it's changed much at all. Here are the details. Quote, "In a surprising shift, the Catholic Conference of Illinois has withdrawn its opposition to legislation that would place sweeping new regulations on homeschooling families across the state. House Bill 2827, known as the Homeschool Act, would significantly expand state oversight of homeschoolers, requiring detailed registration, documentation, and compliance with new instructions previously recorded. Although the bill is primarily aimed at regulating homeschoolers, it also included provisions that would affect private and diocesan schools, raising alarms among Catholic educators and prompting the CCI's initial opposition. Until recently, the Catholic Conference of Illinois had joined other critics in warning that the bill posed a serious threat to educational freedom and parental rights. In an earlier alert, the Catholic Conference of Illinois stated that the bill would force Catholic schools to disclose, quote, personally identifiable data of our students and families, thereby, quote, codifying an overreaching state policy that creates an intrusive relationship between the state and private institutions. In an April 10th statement given to Catholic Vote, the conference said that it originally opposed HB 2827 because parts of the bill would have required private, non-public schools to report detailed information about their students. However, just before the bill was amended and advanced April 9th, the conference received a revised version of the bill in which private and diocesan schools were no longer impacted. The amendment we received the night before the hearing satisfied our concern. Our opposition was addressed, the conference told Catholic Vote. There is nothing in this bill nor in the amendments that interferes with our right to teach children according to the tenets of our faith. The organization has not publicly explained what specific language change to resolve their objections. End quote. Now, you may notice that the opposition from the bishops stopped because it was Catholic schools were suddenly now apparently in an unspecified, never made public way, not subject to this problem anymore. Makes you wonder a little bit. And they also threw homeschoolers under the bus. Now, you're not in the United States. Homeschooling's big here. And I live in the capital of homeschooling, Oklahoma, the most friendly laws in the entire country to homeschooling, where parents are educating their own children. Yeah, they have to pass some very basic state tests to do it, but it's not exactly all that hard, not in Oklahoma. And oftentimes, at least all the homeschoolers I've ever met, they are better educated and better read and tend to speak better and are better with mathematics and all the rest than their counterparts who went through the public school system. And so the bishops, why did they stop opposing this bill? Because the Catholic schools were exempted. You see, a lot of times, and this is certainly not true in the case of all bishops, a lot of bishops are friendly to homeschooling. It's pretty widely done here in Oklahoma. There aren't that many Catholic schools, and most people can't afford to send their kids to them anyway. But homeschooling is a big competitor for the diocesan schools, for your Catholic schools. They just are. We homeschool our oldest son. We're going to homeschool all of them. And the rest hit the age for schooling. We can't afford to send them to a Catholic school. And given the state of the church these days, I don't know if I'd want to. It's not a McCarrick issue thing that I'm so worried about. It's the fact that I'd be afraid that in their catechism classes, they'd come home spouting off about ecumenical dialogue and synodal encounters and all the rest of it. And the bishops want you to have your kids in their schools, at least in some places. And Chicago sounds like the kind of place they'd want that to be, or Illinois more broadly. State of Illinois is coming down hard on homeschooling because more and more people are opting to homeschool. That is without question. All the research data shows that homeschooling is growing by leaps and bounds in the United States, especially in the aftermath of 2020. And the bishops, maybe some of them don't like that. Some of them would rather you find a way to essentially become destitute to send your kids to a Catholic school. Once upon a time, Catholic schools used to actually help defray the cost of their attendance at their schools, and in a lot of places they still do. But even then, with some of the defrayed cost, it's still out of reach for young people. Well, what is a lot of the reasoning behind this? Well, we can go back to the article for that. So we go back here, you'll see this quote. Despite the conference's reversal, critics warn that HB 2827 may still threaten core constitutional protections, citing a century-old Supreme Court precedent affirming parents' rights to direct the upbringing and education of children under their control. Legal analyst Maley Smith of Illinois Policy argued that HB 2827 may violate both due process and religious liberty. Under the bill's provisions, truancy officers would be authorized to interrogate children privately, without cause and without the presence of a parent, merely for their parents failing to file a homeschool notification form. Under the current language of the bill, a single anonymous report of a suspected truancy to a regional office of education would automatically trigger an investigation. The truancy officer would then be legally required to separate the child from their parents for questioning. Even if the officer ultimately finds no cause to proceed, Smith warned the process itself is damaging and invasive. And all of this could be initiated by an anonymous complaint, Smith stated, or a nosy neighbor, or just someone who doesn't like homeschooling. Beyond due process concerns, the bill also violated the First Amendment rights of religious families. The bill introduces language that could enable state officials to collect and catalog details about families' use of faith-based curricula. The so-called educational portfolio, required when a family is flagged for truancy, must include a log of all instructional material used, including religious content. The bill's sponsor, Representative Tara Costa Howard, declined to call the bill for a vote before April 12th House deadline, delaying its progress. However, the proposal could still resurface later in the session through procedural maneuvers or by being attached to other legislation. End quote. You can see why people are rightly concerned about this. Most of the homeschooling curriculum providing organizations, Seton and a few others, are all providing at least as good educational material as the public schools are, oftentimes far better, at least. I'm not a big fan of the public school system anymore. My wife trained to be a public school teacher before she kind of had to face the realization of the state of things in how teachers are trained and how the school systems operate. I'm curious what you think about this. Are you surprised in the slightest that the U.S. bishops would do this? Or that the Illinois bishops, anyway? Let me know if in your state, if you live in a different part of the country or in a different place where homeschooling is, how the secular authorities interact with homeschooling in your country or with the parish schools. Very curious to know what your situation is like. So let me know in the comments. And also hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.